This episode of Murky Sebs Wild Underwater Adventures is brought to you by Anchor New South Wales. Link in the video description. On today's adventure, we are continuing our exploration of Girraween and its surrounding areas. There is a very special and incredibly rare creature I am determined to find. This sign, amazingly, had a picture of exactly what I'm looking for. It is, of course, a bright red crayfish known as the Suttons Spiny Cray. But finding this crayfish would prove to be a much more difficult task than I had first anticipated. Well, according to that sign, the crayfish are in this area. I really hope that we can find them because they look incredible just from those pictures we saw. It's a very sort of swampy area around here with lots of mud, and it seems perfect for crayfish. But they are very elusive, just like the blackfish. Still, let's go and have a look and see if we can find some of the crayfish. The wildflowers were in season, and there were some very cool ants which were busy foraging about on the forest floor. They're commonly referred to as giant red bull ants. No relation to the drink. We can see one ant moving the body of a fallen comrade. They move very gracefully along the ground, and their nests are usually large mounds of rocks that they have painstakingly excavated from their extensive tunnel network below the surface. The rocks have an added bonus of keeping the mound intact even when it rains. They are unable to eat solid food, instead feasting on the juices of their prey insects. However, the larvae are able to eat the bodies of their prey. Their diet is often supplemented by the workers' own infertile eggs, which are commonly fed to the queen and the larvae. I think they have really sweet faces, and they were curious about my camera coming in to investigate what I was doing, with their large eyes providing them with excellent vision. The first creek we stopped at was very murky, and I was unable to find any trace of the spiny crayfish. But after climbing over some large boulders, I found a huge termite nest, which is the big earthy mound on this tree trunk in the distance. This was about as close as I could get to the termite nest. What could have caused all of this destruction and these mysterious holes all over the forest floor? You might have noticed a lot of the ground looks all dug up, and that's actually from feral pigs. They cause quite a lot of damage to the ground when they're searching for food. And as you can see from around here, they've really done quite a lot of damage to the ground and the surrounding area. A lot of it looks quite recent, so hopefully we don't encounter any, because they are very dangerous to be around. Continuing further down the river, I came to this amazing overhang known as Underground Creek, which to me looked like the perfect place for crayfish to live in. But on closer inspection, I didn't manage to find any sign of them. And later on, I would find out why I wasn't encountering any crayfish in this section of Girraween National Park. Wow. I had a great time exploring this area though. It was so unique. Looking at the path this creek had carved out, made for a really amazing and unique landscape. I don't suppose you've seen any crayfish around?
No.
I've been trying to find them all week. Haven't been able to find any.
Oh, there's basically ones up here.
Yeah, they're bright orange and they're only found in this area. Oh, thank you. I'm going to keep trying. wondering why I came all this way just to see a crayfish and some little blackfish, and that's because they're both really special creatures. The crayfish have been totally cut off from the rest of the spiny crayfish, which are a much bigger species than the usual yabbies or other crayfish you may be familiar with. And they're cut off by a large mountain range, and each species of them is basically confined to its own mountain range. And the ones over here are so much further away than their cousins from Lamington National Park, like that big blue one we found, and the other ones around that area. These ones have been separated from them for millions of years, and somehow they've evolved to be bright orange, which is very strange, because something being bright orange you'd think wouldn't be good. You know, any predator would be able to find them easily, but there just mustn't be any predators, or maybe there is some benefit to them being orange. Until I can find one in the wild, I won't know. So I really want to track one down. Same with the blackfish. They're really hard to find, and they have a very limited range as well. And they're really unique compared to the other fish in Queensland. There's nothing quite like them. So I'm really hoping we can find them, but it's proving to be really difficult. So let's have a look in this creek and see if we get lucky. What I would find out several days later by talking to a helpful ranger named Zoe is a devastating fire had come through this area, totally decimating the plants, and also pretty much all the water had evaporated, and only recently it had returned, which would definitely impact the crayfish and blackfish that call this area home. But there was still hope. We headed over to another very remote mountain range, and the only way to get here was driving for over an hour along very narrow, winding dirt roads, until we finally came to this clearing and I discovered this sign that the local farmers had used for target practice. But there was something very special on this sign. It had a species of cod I had never heard of before. It's a relative of the Mary and Murray cod called the Eastern Freshwater Cod, which got me very excited, because if there was anywhere I might be able to encounter one of these magnificent creatures, it would be the remote rivers of this area. Adventuring further into this area, I found a very large, fast-flowing river called the Timbara River, which was the perfect environment for these cod to survive in. You can see here just how wide this river becomes over its 169-kilometre long journey from its beginning to its end. But, strangely, there was no sign of any fish in this area, and I looked in many different spots without even seeing so much as a shrimp. So we made the long drive back to Girraween, and the next day headed to another national park much closer to Girraween. In fact, it was the next mountain range along, and I was amazed by how beautiful this area was. It gave me high hopes that this is where the crayfish would be living. This is a different national park over a mountain range, but it's fairly close to Girraween, and there's supposed to be a type of spiny crayfish that's bright red here as well, and I'd love to find out if it's the same species, but in order to do that I've really got to capture one on film. So I'm hoping that we can manage to track one down, but this river's flowing very quickly and I'm unsure if we're going to be able to find a still enough part of it for the crayfish to live in. Hopefully we can find one. I really want to see one of these bright orange spiny crayfish. See if they are actually as orange as their pictures lead me to believe they are. There's the creek. Let's see if we can get to it. Everywhere I looked amazed me, but it was hard to get down to this section of the creek. So we headed further down the river to a very large pond, but the water was too murky here, so we continued our journey downstream.
We are currently in northern New South Wales trying to find these crayfish. And the best way to find fish that you're looking for is to ask the local rangers or surveyors. Like the creek we were just at, we ran into a surveyor who told us a few points along here where he's seen spiny crayfish in the past. And it's invaluable knowledge when you run into people that know the area well and pay attention to the species that live there. So hopefully the spot he told us about will have some crayfish in it and we can find them.
The next spot we looked at was right next to the road, and the water here was very clear, and there were plenty of plants, which I thought was a good sign. Crayfish love to roam about in plants, so I stopped to investigate this shallow creek. And I am lucky I did, because the first aquatic creature of the journey was living in this river, and these are, of course, the mountain galaxias. The wonderful slender fish from my last documentary, which were the main feature of that video. I was very happy with its find. This was only the second time I'd ever encountered mountain galaxias in the wild. And this is where I got really lucky. Off to the side, happily climbing about on the gravel, searching for food, was what I presume is a very young Suttons Spiny Crayfish. This one was missing their claws, but they will regrow those claws when it comes time to shed their shell. They must have been defending themselves either from a predator or another crayfish, but this is no trouble for them, as their other claws are perfect for picking off bits of algae and plant matter from the ground, which make up the majority of their diets. They have such a sweet, gentle face and a very graceful way of moving. Unfortunately, this little one was frightened by my camera, so I didn't want to get too close and scare them off. Because after such a long journey, and finally having found potentially one of these Suttons Spiny Crayfish, I really wanted to get as much footage of them as I possibly could. But after a while, they did become less scared of me and more curious as to what I was doing in their habitat. They blend in almost perfectly with their surroundings. And over to the side of these native foxtail plants, I saw another beautiful Suttons Spiny Crayfish. This one even had both their claws and was a similar age, possibly being around 10, but it's hard to say as there's not a whole lot of information on them. But if they're anything like the Lamington Spiny Crayfish, they can potentially live to be well over 40 years old. And if they are anything like the Lamington Spiny Crayfish, which were bright blue, there tends to be a bunch of little crayfish living around one large adult female. And I thought, if that's the case, I am determined to find that big female. So I took a lot of time and explored around this area as much as I could, seeing tadpoles and glass shrimp in this little alcove. And there were 2 more spiny crays. Neither were the adults I was looking for, but one of them was much older than the others and was starting to show that distinctive red coloration. I had to be so careful not to get too close to startle this gentle creature as the galaxias swam by them. They didn't know what to make of me and my camera, but over the next 15 minutes of me standing perfectly still, this amazing creature became curious with me and ever so slowly crept closer to investigate. Judging by what I've seen, these little spiny crays are similar to the Lamington spiny crays, as until they become adults, their babies are a brownish colour to help them blend in with the riverbed. It's amazing how each mountain range the spiny crays are found on have their own unique coloration. Just like the Lamington spiny crays being blue and these ones being red, and that's because they've been separated for such a long time. I was overjoyed with this experience. Although it wasn't the large female I was hoping to film, this still was one of my most precious moments that I am so happy to have experienced. And we get an idea of what the adults will look like, as the coloration on this one is only going to get more distinct as they get older. I will venture back here one day and try to film a big female, providing they don't go extinct until that time. They face the same threats as the other spiny crays, being mostly humans removing them from the wild and destroying their habitat. Even taking one adult from a river can mean the end of that species for that particular river, due to how slow growing they are and how long it takes them to reproduce. I was very moved by their sweet, inquisitive eyes. But after standing perfectly still in quite a stressful position, I slipped and accidentally startled this beautiful crayfish, which then proceeded to get away from me and go back to where they felt safe.
I think I've managed to find out why the crayfish were that bright orangey red colour that they are. I thought that it would make them stand out, and it does in certain circumstances, but a lot of the leaves in this river are a red orangey colour, just like the crayfish. So the crayfish obviously like to hang out in those leaves and they can't be seen from above. But when they're moving around on the ground or between the pools, you'll definitely be able to see them because of how distinct that orangey colour is. But yeah, they blend in perfectly with the leaves when there's a big pile of leaves.
I hope you enjoyed coming along on this adventure and learning about these amazing creatures and the area they call home. Until next time, keep it murky.